Hello everybody, my name is Oleksandr. I've been working for Seneca Center for Development of Open Technology here for more than 2 years already. I was working on BigBlueButton project, which is a web conferencing system for online learning. And Maxim?
Yeah, my name is Maxim. I'm from Montreal, currently working at Meteor.com, the dating website. I'm a Seneca graduate and have been working on BigBlueButton project here at Seneca as a research assistant for the last like 3 years. And today we are going to talk about frameworks, the web frameworks that are actually included in the title of our presentation. It's Meteor, React, and Cordova. So let's start with the first one. So Meteor is, in regards to those frameworks, today we will try to give an overview of those technologies and share our own thoughts and maybe some expertise that we gained while working on BigBlueButton HTML5 client with this particular set of tools. So Meteor is a web framework, a JavaScript full stack framework that allows us to build really powerful web applications in almost literally no time. It's super easy to set up, super easy to use, and it's important here because you probably know that nowadays if let's say I want to create a JavaScript full stack web application, the setup itself, the initial setup takes quite some time. And it seems like Meteor just literally came to this world to solve that particular problem. And before going any further, let's take a brief look at the history of the framework. So it was originally created as a travel app startup. Then, after a few years of development, they branded that product as Meteor and released open source. It was not original open source, but in 2 years after the initial development, they decided to publish it under the open source license to apparently gather some additional help from the open source community. So speaking about the technical details, the framework is based on Node.js. So we have JavaScript on the server side and client side. There are two databases that have native integrations into the platform. Those are two really popular NoSQL databases. It's MongoDB and Postgres. It's also worth mentioning that Meteor uses its own package system, and it's called Atmosphere. And just recently they added NPM support. As you may know, NPM is arguably the largest package manager, at least in the JavaScript world. And as a result, this gave us an access to a variety of different packages to choose from. And finally, the framework uses its own data protocol called DDP, Distributed Data Protocol, that I will mention later. So again, Meteor is super easy to use, super easy to set up. It's perfect for web applications, perfect for mobile applications. And you know, even in deployment, the part that is, at least for me, usually often can be pretty confusing. Deployment with Meteor is just a blast for me. So I mentioned a few times that Meteor is easy to use. Let me prove that to you by giving just a few examples. For example, you can install the whole framework, the whole platform with just a single command. You can do it on your Linux machine or Mac OS, and there's even a special version for Windows. It lacks a few features because of being developed kind of in a separate branch from the main development, but still very powerful. And to create an application itself, you also need just one command, Meteor create and the name of your application. After that command, you will get the folder with some initial setup, with a few folders created by Meteor for you. And if you go to that folder named the same as your project and type Meteor run, you'll get by default, you'll get your application running on port, your sample application running on port 3000 on your local host. So it's really easy, and again, deployment is done as well by one command. You just type Meteor deploy and specify the name of the server. Of course, that server needs some configuration to be able to support Meteor deployment, but that's it. And I mentioned before in the previous slide that when you create an app with a single command, you get some simple project structure. So you usually, for the Meteor project, you usually have two folders. It's a client and server, and it's pretty self-explanatory. Whatever file is in the server folder, it's available only on the server side of the application. And if you put some file to the client folder, it's fully available for your front end. Of course, the structure of your project can be pretty sophisticated. You can add different folders, and there are a few rules for that. For example, if you want some file to be lazy loaded, you put it in a special folder, and Meteor knows what to do with that particular file. But yeah, but the idea here is that there is a bunch of rules and conventions. But if you know them, it makes the development on Meteor really enjoyable and easy for you. And let's get to a few principles, or you call it features of the platform. So I mentioned before that it's a JavaScript full stack application. So we have, and it's Node.js based. So you write your code in JavaScript on both client side and server side of your application. So as a result, you don't need to learn additional language. If you know the front-end development, you don't need to learn Java, Python, or whatever. And also, you can even share some of your code between client side and server side, which also can be really useful. And the next feature is one of my favorites. It's called client-side database. So in Meteor, we have database everywhere, on the client side, server side. If you typically if you think about database, you imagine something huge running on the server side. But in Meteor, you also have a replica, in-memory replica of your MongoDB database, and Meteor on the background kind of syncs those databases. So we have, on the client side, you have access to the in-memory store that has the same API as your server-side database, and you don't need to care about syncing those. Also, there's a feature called latency compensation, which is closely tied to the previous point. It's in a typical web development process. When you have your client side, it's usually communicating with the server side by doing multiple requests and waiting for the data in response, and then kind of updating your view. That's how the web usually works. With Meteor, again, we have advantage of having a copy, at least the most recent copy of your database on the client side. So Meteor can sort of simulate or guess what is actually in database. So when we do any request to the server side, Meteor updates the view just immediately. Like it allows you to display the view immediately, and then if we are wrong, if the database actually changed since we last updated the client-side database, it just quickly changed the data in the browser. So that makes the user believe that updating the view actually is done just immediately, just like this. And finally, reactivity. many people call Meteor reactive framework. By that, they mean that there's a few abstractions in your code, such as reactive sources, reactive computations. So it can be functions or variables that are handled by Meteor by constantly keeping updating them on the background, and you don't need to, sometimes you don't need to care about having your variables or computations up to date. Meteor does that for you. And also it's worth mentioning that the project itself, Meteor, as an open source project, really kind of embraces the ecosystem around, embraces the rest of the open source community. We see that by having a lot of native integrations by really big open source projects into Meteor. Those projects include such big names as NPM, React, Angular, Cordova, GraphQL, the most recent addition. So we have all those frameworks, most of them included into the Meteor installation, and you can natively use them in your development without any additional setup. And so far, we've been talking about the architecture or particular features of the Meteor framework. And from the software developer's point of view, that all the access to those features is done by using Meteor API, which is just a set of classes, functions, some predefined API provided to you by Meteor. And by using some of those classes, you don't necessarily need to use all of them, but they're here for you. And if you're developing a Meteor application, you probably will use at least a few of them. And one of the latest additions to the Meteor ecosystem is called Meteor Galaxy. It's a software as a service platform developed by the same guys, the same developers as who are developing the Meteor framework itself. They are providing you a service, a paid service, with a few features such as special support, and it's basically a pre-configured server for you where you can deploy your Meteor application, and then with some login credentials you can actually enter their website and see the connections, monitor the use of your applications in real time. That's really useful, and especially if you are just starting working in Meteor application. Meteor is not that widely used so far, but it's obvious that it's growing really fast, and you can see a number of big companies that are using Meteor right now, and that number is just growing. And in general, there is obviously a pretty optimistic trend in the numbers of companies using the framework. So Meteor is a web framework, and you may probably know that for any web framework, the way we render things on the screen, the view engines, they play a key role. And in Meteor, you actually have a choice between two of the view engines, either Blaze or React, and Alex will continue with some more details about those technologies.
Thank you. All right, as Maxim said, Meteor has integrations with AngularJS also, but we are going to cover just Blaze and React. So what is Blaze? Blaze is a Meteor's original built-in view engine. They developed it in 2011, and it went through a lot of iterations. React wasn't a thing at that point. React appeared and was open source in 2013. Blaze is using spacebars. At the moment Meteor developed Blaze, the most popular template in the engine was handlebars at that point. And Meteor forked handlebars, named it spacebars, in order to adapt it to their dependency tracking system. And this is a simple example of how you define templates in spacebars. On the left, you can see a simple example called again, example. All you need to do is just wrap your HTML in the template tag. If you want to call some helper functions, or if you want to call another templates, all you need to do is just wrap them into curly braces. Also, Spacebars has built-in conditional statements, as you can see on the second example, and it can iterate through the loops. So basically, when you see each items can be or an array passed from the parent template, or it can be a helper function which returns an array and then maps each item to the, in our case, example template. I'm not going to go deep into Blaze, because the reason for that is that when Meteor was initially created in 2011, they had a lot of ambitions. They wanted to have their own package manager, their own view engine. They wanted to solve all the problems in the world. But in reality, at some point they realized that they can't compete with such big frameworks as React.js and Angular. They just added integrations. Their own package manager Atmosphere gave away to NPM. So let's talk about React. What is React? It's an open source JavaScript library or framework. Some people call it like this. It was created by Facebook. But what's important to know, it's not a complete framework. It's just a view in the MVC. It still needs something running in the background. This is an official goal of React, as defined by Facebook. The goal is to help building large applications with data that changes over time. And looking at the number of companies which switch to React, and we can say that they managed to meet that goal so far. A little bit of history. So it was created React was created initially by just one engineer at Facebook. It was an experiment. They wanted to try to transfer XHP to JavaScript. XHP was a Facebook's version of PHP. And it took him half a year. And in 2011, the experiment was a success. And in 2011, React was deployed to Facebook's newsfeed. Instagram started using it in 2012, and they made a decision to open source it in 2013. Don't be confused with React Native. This is kind of hot right now. It's a completely different technology. It allows you to, it's called React Native, but basically it allows you to build mobile applications using the same syntax. But it almost has nothing to do with the version of React. So why would anyone use React? It's a simple and declarative library. Everything in React is a component, or just a JavaScript class which returns some HTML code. Those components can be reused, and the overall structure of the code becomes more modular and more readable. JSX syntax and the concept of virtual DOM are probably the two biggest features of why, biggest reasons of why would you use React. So let's talk about them more. JSX stands for JavaScript XML. On the right, you can see an example of simple React component, or you can see it's just a JavaScript class which extends React.component. Each component in React is supposed to have, it must have a render function, which in its turn returns HTML. And JSX allowed us to return pure HTML. It's not a string, it's not anything else, it's HTML. And here is an example of how you pass a variable from one component to another. So we have our store component on the left. I define a simple variable called _name, and I call the shopping list component from the right. And so the shopping list can simply access that variable by calling this.props.name. Talking about simplicity of React, these are all React lifecycle functions on one slide. we have just 4 scenarios here. It's very similar to iOS development, iOS elements, view elements lifecycle. You don't have to use all of this. You don't have to know this. In fact, it's just 8 or 9 functions, I think, because they duplicate each other. But if you want to customize your view, if you want to customize your web app, if you want to inject some JavaScript code before your component was rendered, after, or before it was updated, or after, then you might want to look at it. React Virtual DOM. This is probably the main feature of React. This was the reason why companies started switching to React initially, because it was super fast. What does it mean? The idea is React keeps a virtual copy of the real DOM. And when something is changed, let's say user clicked a button or the underlying value in the database was changed, React computes the difference in the virtual DOM, and then it compares what's different between the virtual DOM and the real DOM, and applies a difference in a series of optimized transactions. So as you can see on this picture, on the first, it's a timeline. We have a real DOM on the bottom and virtual DOM on top. So each circle represents a node. So on the first screen, we see something's changed. Let's say user clicked a button. React computed the difference and realized that it's supposed to update not only that node, but also its child. And at the last step, it applied the difference to real DOM. Meteor and React. That's probably the best choice you can make if you want to have an efficient app. As I said before, React is only a view. It still needs to have a solid framework running in the background. And together with Meteor's reactivity and Meteor's latency compensation, it looks like they were created for each other. Also, you don't need any standalone build tools. Sometimes it can take days to create an initial setup, to add transpilers for ES6 classes, for JSX, and make it all work with Node.js and with hot code updates, and etc. Meteor has built-in browserify, so basically it does that for you. Also, there is a huge ecosystem surrounding React, so it's easier to solve problems, and it has also, our experience. As I said, Maxim and I were working on BigBlueButton, and one of the things we worked on was BigBlueButton's HTML5 version of the client, which is basically a Meteor-based standalone web application. So last December, we decided to switch from Blaze to React. Frankly speaking, we almost didn't have any problems except very narrow specific cases. But a couple of things you want to keep in mind if you're in the same situation. With React, you can't use jQuery, and that's a big one. jQuery became a default library for any web application. It was a default maybe a year ago. And in fact, you can't use any other libraries not adapted to React. The reason for that is React keeps, as I said, React keeps a virtual reference of the real DOM. And if React finds out that you changed the DOM directly without its knowing about it, it just breaks. Also, it took some time for us to get used to new patterns and to so-called reactive way of thinking. But usually, it says it takes like 2 to 4 weeks to get used to that. But yeah. As you can see, the list of companies who switched to React and using React at the point is much bigger than Meteor's. So that was one of the reasons why Meteor added integrations with React. And all these names basically speak for themselves. React is a solid framework. All right, so at this point we talked about Meteor and React. The next logical step would be to efficiently use this code to create a native mobile application. And Maxim will talk about it.
Yeah, again, so the answer to, well, in order to deploy your application that you already developed with Meteor and React to different platforms, of course, mobile platforms are widely popular these days. In order to do that, we use Cordova. Cordova is a development platform. I like to call it a platform because it's not just a framework, it has all the tooling around it as well. So it's a development platform for developing mobile applications with the typical stack of web technologies such as HTML, JavaScript, CSS. I believe there's no better way to describe the purpose of Cordova than the following phrase that you can see write once and run everywhere. So the point here is to be that with Cordova you are able to write your application with the tools that you are probably already familiar with, especially if you're, for example, front-end developer. You write that application once, and Cordova just compiles this web application into a set of different versions for all the major platforms. The platforms that are supported, the operating systems that are supported are the following: BlackBerry, Ubuntu, Windows Phone, and I specifically highlighted two of them, iOS and Android, because those two have native Meteor support as well, which helps if you are developing application with Meteor as well. Again, let's start with a short introduction into the history of the framework. It was originally created at a dev camp or at a hackathon as a student project, and a few guys later, after the dev camp, created a company around the product. They've been developing the product for 2 years. And finally, it was acquired by Adobe and rebranded to Adobe PhoneGap. And just 1 year after that, they decided to actually publish the core libraries of that system to open source. They named it Apache Cordova. So right now, we basically have two versions of this system. It's Apache Cordova, open source, widely used system that are there for you to use, and also Adobe PhoneGap, which is Apache Cordova plus some of the build tools that Adobe provides to you to ease the development process. Speaking about the core features of the platform, again, it allows you to compile, to transform your web application into a native one. And you can think about the output of this process as your web application in some folder, let's say, packaged together with a headless copy of the browser engine. So it can be Safari for iOS or, for example, WebKit for Android. And that package of your web application plus the headless copy of the browser can be run on any device you want that are supported by Cordova. And in case you want to use some native functionality of your phone, such as, for example, geolocation or maybe access to your camera, that functionality usually is not supported by browsers. If you want to do that, there are countless of plugins available for you and provided by Cordova open source community. And finally, the publishing of your application is also very easy. At the end of the build process, you just get a file that you can just upload to the website of your particular app store and have your application published. And you may wonder what that means to use Cordova with Meteor. We mentioned that Cordova has a native integration into the Meteor. First of all, that means It's available by default, so when you are installing Meteor with the command, with one command that we provided before, you already have Cordova. You already get Cordova. Cordova also is integrated into the build system of the Meteor, so it provides you access to different login options, build options, and you can use all of that. And finally, there is a feature, one of my favorites, it's called hot code push. Cordova developers outside of the Meteor world, they usually face the problem of frequent republishing. So let's say you have some small bug on the client side, and if you are a Cordova developer, in order to you fix the bug, and in order to update your application on the end device, on the end user device, you actually need to always republish your app. So you need to go through the whole republishing process all over again. Instead of that, with Meteor, as mentioned before, when Cordova application is running, most of the view code is actually being downloaded from the server and in real time. And as a result, in order to fix some small bug in your view on the client side, you don't need to actually republish the application. You just add a change to the code on your server, and that's it. No republishing all over again. And also, some of the core features of the Cordova include, we all know that, so yeah, we mentioned that Cordova, just as Meteor is easy, Cordova with Meteor is easy to use as well. And we just need one command to add the platform that you want to develop your application for, to get all the necessary tools available. Then, in order to run your application, to maybe test or debug, you just add an additional parameter to the Meteor run command, and you can run it on your device if you connect it to the computer or the emulator in the operating system itself. Again, deployment is also made by just one command, because when you run Meteor build, as the output you get a file that you can upload to the store, as I mentioned a few slides before. You can see how many companies are using Cordova. It's a really big community. It's growing all the time, and so far you really may notice how just really awesome Cordova is. At least I believe so, and I want to be honest with you. So it's really awesome, but there's always a but in this world. So in the case of Cordova, it is as well, and there are a few drawbacks. It may not be as important in your case, but it's still worth knowing them. So sometimes you can, comparing Cordova application to a native one, you can notice some maybe slower performance. And also, in case of slow connections, since most of the view is being downloaded from the server, in case of the Cordova application, the user may see just a plain, for the first few seconds, the user may see just a plain page, and then all the styling will be loaded, so it may look a little bit ugly in case of the slower connections. And finally, of course, we have access to most of the native functionality of your phone through the plugins, and also to some graphics functions. But of course, there's a limitation in comparison to the native applications. But I want to mention here that on the previous slide, one of the companies you could notice was Zynga, which is a big mobile game studio, and they seem to be pretty happy with the usage of Cordova. So this drawback of advanced graphic features may not be that bad in your case, and I feel that the futures of Cordova in that regards is pretty optimistic. Just to conclude our presentation today, I'll just summarize what we basically learned. We learned how to create a pretty powerful web application thanks to Meteor, and that application can have an efficient rendering engine to efficiently display the view to the endpoint browser, user's browser, thanks to React. And of course, Cordova can help us to actually deploy that application to as many different platforms as possible, especially mobile platforms. So yeah, and after today's talk, as a result, we just hope that you'll find some time to check out these technologies, and we believe that you'll find it useful. You will find it useful and hopefully enjoyable. So now I think it's time for any questions from the audience, and we can answer them.
What are the new patterns that you experienced?
So yeah, the question was what were the new patterns? I think you're talking about the React, because we mentioned that.
Well, the standard way of you're asking about the React patterns, right?
Yes.
So in React, how it used to be, you have an event, you have a listener for that event, and you might have multiple listeners all over the application. Something's changed, and you just call a jQuery function and change the DOM directly. With React, you have to think of, you can change the DOM directly, you have to change the state, or you have to, so generally speaking, you have to explain the React templates how this application should look like at a given point of time with this given state, and then you just, it will handle it for you. It's a completely different way of thinking, designing the application, maybe.
So yeah, like the way to present your page in the browser windows is different, and the steps are different, and as a result, you need to think differently in order to make some changes to apply to your concrete application. So it's a real revolution in the world. You need to think completely different if you're a React developer than the whole world been thinking before for the last 15 years or something. So yeah, other questions? Yes.
So all the views are generated on the fly from the server and sent to the phone, is that correct?
In case of Cordova, yeah. Basically, you can think about it as just the same flow as you have in the browser, but you don't have your user doesn't see a browser, so there is no the URL line or anything else. But everything else is just the same as where you just see that as a native application, but in the background it's basically very similar to a web application. So yeah, it's generated on the fly. Yeah. But most of the resources and like pictures and heavy resources are available on the device, so it's much faster in that case to load them.
Would it be possible to cache some of the stuff so that they could use it offline?
Yes, of course you can do it with your typical web application as well. So whatever functionality you have in the browser, you can use in Cordova. And again, like the pictures and all the resources are cached even better than the browser because they're available in the device. So sometimes there's no even point of caching because it's there. So yeah, maybe something else.
So database, you said it's implicitly replica. It always.
Yeah, it's actually really cool.
So you don't have to do backup and restore, or you don't have to worry about that component.
Yeah, basically the Meteor inserts into your client-side code some store that has the same API as the database. You just use the same functions as you use on the server side, just as though you're inserting in the database something, but Meteor handles syncing by itself. So you, on the client side, if you want to change something you want to change the name of the user in the chat or something like that, you just insert it on the client side into that store, and then like a few milliseconds after that, Meteor by itself just updating on the background, just syncing those two databases. So that idea is not actually new. It's also used by some of the other databases, such as CouchDB, for example, but in Meteor, it's much more integrated into the framework. Any other questions? That seems to be it, I think.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.